All right, world studies. It's been a long time since we've had to do any video, but we're going to catch some here and cover some Cold War. This will either work for, well, I don't know, whether we're going to just use it in general or it's going to be for those of you that are gone for the soccer game. But here we go. And we did have a little bit of a difference between, I think we got down to the bottom of the slide in second period, but first period we did not. So we had just finished up a very busy 1949, and we're not even finished yet. There's even more to go. We've had talked about the formation of NATO and the Berlin airlift and all that kind of business. So a busy year. It gets even busier with big events going on over in Asia, which we have ignored. We've been pretty much fixated on Europe here on the Cold War so far. In 1949, there is a revolution, actually the end of a civil war that's been fought for a number of years in China. Back even before World War II broke out, a communist party in China led by the guy you see over on the left side, Mao Zedong. They had been fighting against the Chinese government, basically like a civil war. And when World War II broke out, the two sides kind of called a truce and both fought against the Japanese. But when the war ends in 1945, that truce is called off and the Civil War resumes. And it ends in 1949 with Mao Zedong and the Chinese Communist Party taking over power in China and resulting, like it says there, in red China, red being that color of communism, color of revolution. And so a lot of times you hear it referred that way. And this is, again, despite having that policy of containment, this is where the West and the United States starts to really get a little concerned because, while I'm not talking about 1/3 of the globe in physical space, but 1 out of every 3 people is living under communism by the end of 1949. So despite our attempts to contain communism, it's actually spreading, and it's spreading rapidly. And that for the United States is definitely a big cause for a lot of fear. And triggers, we'll get to that in just a moment. I'm getting ahead of myself. Also 1949. One of the big advantages the United States had going into 1949 is that we were the only country that had atomic/nuclear weapons technology. The Soviet Union did not have it. No one had it. We were it. And so every time, Berlin airlift, anytime there was any kind of a conflict or challenge from the Soviet Union, we always had in our back pocket that we've got a weapon that you don't have. Don't make us use it, okay? And be careful, don't stare into that bright light too much. That changes in 1949. The Soviet Union successfully tests their own atomic bomb. They are able to get it through using espionage, a network of spies who had been spying on the atomic weapons program here in the United States, and were able to get information back to the Soviet Union so that they could build their own bomb. And so now these two superpowers are going to both be armed to the teeth with this incredible weaponry, incredibly destructive weaponry. And this is the beginning of an arms race. An attempt by each side to try to make sure that they had more weapons, more nuclear atomic weapons than the other. WMD that you see mentioned there in C, that is weapons of mass destruction. Okay, just an acronym for that. And another acronym that I didn't add on here is the acronym MAD, M-A-D, which means mutually assured destruction. And that is the idea that both sides knew as they started building up first, hundreds of weapons and then thousands of, missiles and that sort of thing, all of them, nuclear. They knew that if we ever get into a war with each other, no one's going to win. Okay? Mutually assured destruction means we both know that we will destroy each other in a war that might happen to break out. There you go, mutually assured destruction right there. Just need to get on, take a look at the map there. I mean, if that's what goes on in a war that breaks out between the Soviet Union and the United States or any of our allies, there's not going to be anywhere on Earth that isn't going to be affected. The radiation is going to get into the atmosphere and be spread around the planet. And some scientists, they were concerned that a nuclear war would result in effect, a dead planet. That it would result in nothing being able to live on the planet. Definitely not humans, but not even plants, bugs, nothing. That it would result in the potential for a dead planet. Anyhow, that is what that is all about. And it's going to be a big part of what goes on in the Cold War for the remainder of the time that this war is part of our reality. All right, let's pick up the pace here. What else do we got? Oh, that's what I was trying to get ahead of that. And that is that, with all this fear about the potential for nuclear war, fear about the spread of communism, it triggers what comes to be known as the Red Scare in the United States. And, it's just that fear of communism, whether it's going to take over our own government. People are worried that, there's communists that are operating in the United States and, hiding under your beds and in your closets, that kind of fear. And then just that general fear that, that if we get in a war with these people, it's not going to be like World War II or any other war, because now we've got these incredibly destructive weapons that we can utilize against each other. And so, even in schools, kids are watching little Bert the Turtle there, teaching them, show them films on, how to duck and cover, how to crawl under their desks, like that's going to save them in a nuclear blast. I guess what makes you feel better. But the Red Scare is very real. And in some ways, it's even more than just fear itself. And a lot of people end up being accused of being communists. People end up having their lives and their reputations, their jobs ruined because of accusations of communism. And there were some Americans that I'm sure that were communists. Who thought it was actually, they liked the idea of, again, this form of government that has the goal of, eliminating poverty. Which, I don't think there's any of us that would argue against that. But despite its goals, just the way it's working in countries like the Soviet Union and China, it doesn't look like any kind of a fairy tale that the rest of the world wants to try. And so it just does create this fear. Okay. Anyhow, that covers you for D. All right. Moving on, like it says there in section 3, Cold War during the 1950s. Let's start it off with first. Probably we'll talk about a couple 50s and 1960s into the 70s. Some examples of the Cold War that actually gets hot. Okay, shooting war with people dying and that kind of a thing. The Korean War is going to be the first example of this. Starts in 1950. Short little war will last until 1953. Korea had been captured from the Japanese at the end of World War II. When the war ended, the Soviet Union controlled the northern part of South Korea, and the United States had helped to free the southern part of South Korea. And just, and that it kind of reminds you a little bit of what we talked about with Germany. They decided that they're just going to divide the country right along across the 38th parallel, kind of where you see on that picture there between the red and the blue. And the Soviet Union would continue to give help to the North Koreans, and the United States would give a little bit of help to South Korea, but South Korea was pretty much on its own. That ends in 1950 when North Korea attacks and invades into South Korea. They want the entire country to be communist. And so North Korean soldiers cross the 38th parallel and invade into the country. The United States and the United Nations gets involved in this war very quickly, and this is part of that policy of containment. We've already seen China fall to communism. We'll be darned if we're going to allow, the North and Korea to end up that way. And so the U.S. sends soldiers. The UN, a bunch of nations of the United Nations send soldiers to fight against North Korea. Getting my wars mixed up here. And it ends up being a fairly successful war. Once American troops get in there and other UN troops, we're able to push the North Koreans all the way out of the south. And actually, we end up pushing them almost all the way up to the border between North Korea and the green you see on that map. That is China right up there, communist China, who was also helping out North Korea by then. And once we get up close to the border, China actually sends soldiers into North Korea to help the North Korean army, and they keep shooting it out. The war continues on, like I said, for a couple of years here, and finally in 1953 they're back to pretty much that 38th parallel, and an armistice is declared. There's never an official peace treaty that ends the Korean War. Matter of fact, the Korean War is still a war in 2023, okay? Because there's never been an official treaty to actually end it. And so the Korean War, which comes to be known as a forgotten war, not a lot of Americans know about it. We ended up losing about 40,000 soldiers in that war. And it's always just kind of like, I think between World War II and Vietnam, it just gets lost in the middle. The picture over there on the right side down at the bottom, that shows the boundary right now in current times between North and South Korea. That little bar you see right along there is the actual border between the South and the North on the other side. And the two guys you see whose backs are to us, those are South Korean military personnel, and the guys they're facing are North Korean military personnel. And those of you who are news followers, you know that North Korea has been in the news a lot as a country who, in more recent years, is bent on developing their own nuclear weapons. But we'll leave it in the 1950s and not get ourselves too far into, current events on all of that. All right. Moving on, and we're still in the 1950s. Big shift. 1953, Joseph Stalin. He's getting a little bit old and taking very good care of himself. Ends up dying of basically a cerebral hemorrhage, and is replaced by Nikita Khrushchev, the guy you see there, who seems to be, from that photograph, worshiping an ear of corn. I think that is a picture that was taken when he came to a visit to the United States. When Khrushchev became the leader, he came in saying that I'm a very different guy than Stalin. I'm not going to be this scary, kill off all my opponents and anyone that I'm, suspicious of. He's kind of like the days of paranoia and fear are over. And at one point he does. He even comes here and visits in the United States. Stalin never would have done that. Our president at the time, Eisenhower, invites him over, and he comes. And I think that's where the picture of the corn. I think he was touring a U.S. farm, and very impressed with U.S. corn. The other part of that trip I still remember is he wanted to go to Disneyland. And for security reasons, Disneyland denied his request, making him very, very sad. I don't think it was the Disneyland denial that results in this right here. Even though he was a softer touch than Joseph Stalin, Khrushchev could still get himself worked up into quite a temper. This is a little clip from a speech he gave in the United Nations in the 1950s, where he started getting really, really worked up about the way the United States and the West was treating the Soviet Union. And he became so overcome with anger that he took his shoe off, that's what he has in his hand, and started pounding it on the table that he's sitting there giving his speech. So, I guess if you ever want to make a point with someone, there's something you could try, or I don't know, maybe it just looks silly. Anyhow, there's your man, Nikita Khrushchev, all right, who is, as of 1953, is the new leader of the Soviet Union. All right, we'll jump it to 1957, and shock. The United States and the Soviet Union were both working on trying to develop some kind of a vehicle that they could put into space. And each side knew that they were working on it. And so it was a race, which is why we call it the space race. It was kind of these goals to, first get something into space, and then man into space, and big goals, maybe like get a man on the moon or something like that. Anyhow, the United States was totally sure that we were winning this. I mean, come on, it's the United States. We've got the best scientists, we've got the best everything. And so we were stunned, we were shocked when in 1957 the Soviet Union launches Sputnik, which is that shiny beach ball with 4 kind of little legs sticking out of it that you see there. That is Sputnik. And that ball was about the size, that silver-looking dome there, that was about the size of a beach ball. I mean, it was not some big, it was pretty tiny. And it was just a satellite. They launched it, and it circled the globe for, I think, a few days before it finally kind of burned itself out. But, it was a man-made craft that had been launched into space and had done what it was intended to do. And a big embarrassment to the United States, who viewed themselves, as being technologically, more advanced than the Soviet Union. And yet they beat us there. And then the Soviet Union immediately started going to work on figuring out how to get a man into space. Over there on the the left side, you see a picture of Laika, the Soviet space dog. And yes, they were using dogs. They were launched dogs into space to try to test to see whether, they could potentially, the craft that they were building would be able to maintain a human life in it. And Laika was a brave little dog that, kind of gave his all for the Soviet Union. He was launched, I think, about another year after Sputnik. And unfortunately, Laika did not survive the trip. But did give the Soviet Union information that they'd be able to use in their quest to try to put a man into space. Sorry, little Laika. I know it's kind of a sad little story, isn't it? All right. Finishing off the 1950s, we're going to zoom over here to the Western Hemisphere. And more scary news for the United States. Down in Cuba, you see the map there, right down south of Florida, there is a revolution. And the guy that you see pictured over on the left and the right, the guy with the beard, because, again, these revolutionaries, got to have the facial hair. Fidel Castro is a communist, and he leads a revolution and throws out the American-supported leader of Cuba and replaces him with himself at the lead of a communist government. And so, the United States, again, these are some rough times for us in the Cold War. We're kind of taking it on the chin. We wake up one day, if you ever make it down to Key West in Florida, awesome place. But there's a point, and it is called the southernmost point of the United States. And from there, you're only 90 miles away from Cuba. And so, yeah, if you're down here in Key West, okay, right down there, you could probably take a deep inhale that breath. You could probably smell the communism that's so close. And that drives a lot of fear into Americans as well. Okay, to have communism now in the Western Hemisphere, that's just like mind blown. All right. Okay. We're going to get a little bit of the 60s and 70s here. What do I got? I'm 17 minutes in. All right, we'll take it a little bit further. The 60s and 70s, they were groovy times, but not so much when we talk about the Cold War. First of all, 1960, yeah, we don't wait too long with Castro down there in Cuba. And in 1960, we don't try to invade Cuba ourselves. It's not like we send the U.S. military. Instead, we take a bunch of Cubans who had escaped the island when Castro took over and train them up into a little army. And then we hope to kind of get them in there to attempt to attack and get their country back again. The invasion is an absolute failure. It's really embarrassing to the United States again because it doesn't take long to figure out that we were the ones that were kind of behind it. And again, it just, man, it's tough times for the United States. And they keep on coming. 1961, the Soviet Union gets us again. They put that smiling gentleman there, Yuri Gagarin, into space and orbits the planet a few times and then safely returns back to Earth. They beat us by about a month. We were able to put our first astronaut, by the name of Alan Shepard, into space only about a month and a half after Yuri Gagarin is able to complete his successful trip. And ours is successful as well. But, we're 0 for 2 in the space race. And it is embarrassing, all right? And this is just, like I said, man, it is tough times. Meanwhile, flipping things back to Europe, and particularly the trouble spot in Germany, 1961. Here goes the Soviet-backed government of East Germany, I should put it, who put up the Berlin Wall. And their reason for doing this, and they kind of like we see this red line. Here's the city of Berlin on this map, and this red line represents where they build. And this is not like the Iron Curtain, folks. This is a real wall, okay? Most places it's about 10, 12 feet high, concrete, barbed wire, and they put up machine gun nests around the place to guard it. The whole reason is because all through the 1950s, Germany and East Berlin is noticing that their population is getting smaller and smaller. And that's because a lot of Germans are going to Berlin and crossing from East Berlin into West Berlin and asking to be sent to West Germany so that they can live a better life. Life in Soviet-controlled East Germany just isn't that good. You have to get on waiting lists to get apartments. Most people can't afford even the thought of being able to buy your own car, things like that. It's just, consumer goods are hard to come by, and it's hard to find good work, that sort of thing. Meanwhile, in West Germany, their economy is booming, and people are making good money, and all the things that they want are there. And so, millions of Germans are bailing out of the eastern part of Germany and going to Berlin so that they can get to West Germany. Well, in 1961, this is how the East German government, again, controlled by the Soviet Union, this is how they respond to it, is by building that wall, okay? And and like I said, physical wall, and this really, you could argue the Iron Curtain is kind of a symbol, but even almost more so because this is a real wall. The Berlin Wall, and for the years that it is up, it is really seen as kind of like another one of those big symbols of this whole kind of struggle between the communist world and the non-communist world, and the idea that they have to build walls not to keep people out, but to trap their own people in, and for Americans and a lot of other people around the world. It's like, you want to know how good communism is working? There's your proof right there. They have to build walls to keep their people from leaving. There's how good communism's working out for them. All right, let's grab one more. We can do it. All right, one more. And it's a big one, folks, okay? This is going to be as close as the world comes to World War III during the Cold War, okay? And yes, and we are going back to Cuba again. All right. Our president at that time is John F. Kennedy, and he had actually been the president who gave the go-ahead for that failed invasion in 1960. And so Cuba is definitely kind of a sore spot for him. Well, here we are a couple of years later, and the United States is flying basically a spy aircraft over Cuba, just kind of keep an eye on what the communists are doing there. And in October of 1962, one of these spy flights comes back with photographs that have all kinds of unusual stuff going on them. I know it's too tiny for us to tell what's going on here. Well, you blow those pictures up, and the United States, we had our military analysts who did this, and they were stunned to find out that it was absolute proof that there were missiles being set up in Cuba. And these were missiles that Cuba did not have. First they were like, where are they getting these from? And it did not take long to figure out what was happening. With the invitation of Fidel Castro in Cuba, the Soviet Union had been bringing across the Atlantic Ocean shiploads of nuclear warheads, missiles, and setting them up in Cuba aimed at the United States. Okay? Now, before we just completely jump off the handle and say, those evil communists, those evil Russians, the United States also had missiles in parts of the world aimed at the Soviet Union. By the early 1960s, the country of Turkey, which was an ally of ours, and very close to the Soviet Union, had given us permission to set up nuclear missiles that were set up aimed at the Soviet Union. And so in the Soviet Union's eyes, this is just kind of, tit for tat. It's just like, well, you got missiles aimed at us over in our part of the world. We're going to come over and aim some missiles at you in your part of the world. Okay? Hopefully it kind of makes sense. But it's definitely, they were trying to pull it off secretly. And they're found out. And the United States tells, Kennedy tells the Soviet Union, tells Khrushchev, get them out. And if you don't take them out, we're going to take them out. Okay. Our big concern is, you can see on the map over here, the Soviet Union is setting up both what they call short range, medium range, and long range nuclear warheads. And warhead, just fancy word for these missiles. And this is all the range that they had. And this is still back in early days. I mean, now these missiles can hit anywhere. But early 60s, these were the parts of the United States that those missiles could take out. I mean, luckily up here in Washington, we were safe. But, the majority of the United States was in range of these missiles. And this is why the United States is just absolutely, they have got to come out or else. And the Soviet Union is right back at us saying, no, we were invited to set these up. Castro's worried you're going to launch another invasion against him. He wants these missiles to defend himself. And it launches into basically about a 2-week standoff where the world didn't know if this was it, if the world was going to end, that this was going to be, the end of everything, World War III, basically, that the United States would attack, the Soviet Union would launch the missiles, we would launch missiles, and, and off we go, our worst nightmare come true. After about 2 weeks, the Soviet Union backed down. Okay. They said they would, and they kept good on their word. They dismantled all their missiles, all their launching pads and everything, and packed them up on ships, and they sent them back across the ocean to the Soviet Union. As part of the agreement that we secretly made with the Soviet Union, a few months later, not a lot of people noticed, but we took down our missiles that were in Turkey and brought them back to the United States. And so in the end, it was kind of, kind of one of those deals where we both got something out of it and kind of brought the just the fear level down. But that is the significance of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Is it was, as many people said, that it felt like we were minutes away from the end of the world. I was still a couple years to be born, but my parents were alive during that, and they said, for those 2 weeks, sometimes you'd go to bed at night and you did not know if you were going to wake up the next morning. The fear was that real, that this was not going to work out well, and it was going to result in nuclear war. So anyhow, that is where we'll end it because I'm coming up on 30 minutes. Well, I'm only at 27. What am I saying? But no, we're gonna stop it there. Okay, that is more than enough. We'll catch the rest of the 60s. We still got to look at the Vietnam War. We got to look at we got some other stuff we got to do. Anyhow. We're making good ground on this, and make sure you get this stuff in the notebook. Hopefully I gave you some other little tidbits there that you can toss in to your left column as well. All right? We'll cover us. See ya.